There's something about the smell of freshly ground coffee that has always calmed me. The rich aroma, the promise of warmth between your palms, the ritual of those first few sips that make the morning bearable. Funny how something so comforting would become the backdrop for the moment my professional life imploded. My name is Alex Morgan, and until 3 months ago, I was just another face in the crowd at Horizon Marketing, a mid-sized agency in downtown Denver. 7 years of showing up early, staying late, and making everyone else look good. 7 years of being the reliable one, the one who remembered birthdays and fixed problems before they exploded. 7 years of watching others climb past me while I held the ladder steady. That particular Wednesday started like any other. The October chill had settled over the city, painting the mountains in the distance with the first dusting of snow. I was reviewing presentation notes for our quarterly client meeting when James Parker strode in, his custom Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood floors like he was keeping time to his own personal soundtrack. James had been with the company for 18 months. Harvard MBA, connections in every corner of the industry, and a smile that made our female clients extend lunch meetings by an hour. He was also my new supervisor, despite having 3 years less experience and a portfolio that was half mine anyway. Alex, just the person I was looking for. He leaned against my desk, his cologne invading my space before he did. We need to sweeten up the Wellington team. Before the presentation, they've been on the fence about renewing their contract. I nodded, already pulling up their file. I prepared a summary of their concerns from the last meeting. I think if we addressed the social media metrics, they were perfect. Perfect, he interrupted, barely glancing at my screen. Listen, could you run to Westside Coffee and grab their usual order? I'd go myself, but I need to make some calls before they arrive. It wasn't a request. It never was with James. The company card is in the admin drawer, I said, reaching for my coat. Actually, he flashed that practiced smile. I have it right here. Been covering some client entertainment costs. He handed me the sleek black corporate card. Just the coffees for now. I'll handle the catering arrangements myself. Later. Something about the way his fingers lingered on the card gave me pause, but I dismissed it. Office politics had taught me to choose my battles carefully. Westside Coffee was 6 blocks away, a small independent cafe tucked between a bookstore and a vintage record shop. It was out of the way, but the Wellington team preferred their beans to the Starbucks on our corner. What the client wanted, the client got. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, the warmth inside a welcome relief from the brisk morning air. Only a few customers occupied the mismatched furniture. A college student with headphones, an elderly man reading the newspaper, 2 women in yoga pants chatting animatedly. Behind the counter stood Dorothy, a silver-haired woman in her 60s who'd been serving coffee there since I first started coming years ago. Alex, haven't seen you in a while, she called out, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The usual Wellington order? I smiled, grateful she remembered. You're a lifesaver, Dorothy. Give me a few minutes to get it all together, she said, turning to the espresso machine. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through emails while I waited. A text. From James popped up. Get yourself something too. My treat. My treat. With the company card. Typical James. When Dorothy set the carrier with 5 elaborate coffee cups on the counter, I handed her the corporate card. And I'll take a small Americano for myself, please. She ran the card and handed me the receipt to sign. As I scribbled my signature, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Honey, is that your company card? I looked up, confused. Yes, why? Dorothy's weathered hand suddenly gripped my wrist, her eyes darting to make sure no one was listening. That man who comes in here with you sometimes, tall, always on his phone? James, my supervisor? Her fingers tightened. Please, don't go back to the office without hearing me out. I've seen what he's been doing. It's not just coffee he's been buying with your company card. The world seemed to slow down, coffee shop noise fading to a dull hum as Dorothy's words sank in. My throat went dry. What do you mean? She glanced over her shoulder, then pulled me slightly aside. He comes in at least twice a week, always alone. Orders expensive gift baskets, wine from our reserve shelf, even those high-end chocolate sets we import from Belgium. Always puts it on that same black card, always asks for the receipts to be labeled just as Westside Coffee, with no itemization. My stomach twisted into a knot. How long has this been happening? At least 4 months, she said, her voice steady but concerned. I didn't think much of it at first. Corporate folks expense all sorts of things. But last Weak, I overheard him on the phone out front, laughing about how easy it was to pad the entertainment budget, since no one checks the receipts anyway. My mind raced back through the past months, the quarterly budget reports I'd helped prepare, the steadily increasing client hospitality expenses that James had insisted were necessary investments, the Wellington team who supposedly loved their, gift baskets. Gift baskets I'd never actually seen. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. Dorothy's eyes softened. "Because you sign those receipts sometimes, dear. And in my 70 years, I've learned that when someone's building a ladder by stepping on others, eventually everyone falls." I stood frozen, the coffee carrier suddenly heavy in my hands. "There's a back exit through the storeroom," Dorothy whispered, nodding toward a door behind the counter. "If you want to see for yourself, he usually comes in around lunch on Wednesdays, orders his special client packages. Today would be the day." Without thinking, I nodded. "Thank you, Dorothy. Be careful, Alex. Men like that don't like being caught." I slipped out the back door, found my car, and placed the coffee order inside. Then, instead of driving back to the office, I parked across the street, positioning myself with a clear view of Westside Coffee's entrance. For the first time in 7 years, I was about to be deliberately, unapologetically late for work. And as I sat there watching the door, I felt something unexpected rise within me. Not just anger or betrayal, but a strange, unfamiliar sense of awakening. The Wellington presentation would start in 45 minutes. My phone buzzed with texts from James asking where the coffee was. I turned it off, and I waited. The October sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the street as I sat in my car, watching. At 11:37, exactly as Dorothy had predicted, James emerged from around the corner. He walked with the casual confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never been caught. Phone pressed to his ear, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I slid lower in my seat as he pushed through Westside Coffee's door, the little bell announcing his arrival. My heart pounded against my ribs. 7 years of following rules, of doing things the right way, and here I was, hiding in my car, spying on my boss. Part of me wanted to drive away, to pretend Dorothy had never whispered those words. The safe part, the predictable part. But I stayed. Through the cafe's wide front window, I could see James at the counter, flashing that $1,000,000 smile at Dorothy. She played her role perfectly. The kindly barista, giving no indication of our earlier conversation. He leaned casually against the counter, sliding the black corporate card across the surface. I fumbled with my phone, finally managing to open the camera app. The zoom wasn't great, but I could make out enough. James pointing to items on a shelf behind the counter. Dorothy nodding, gathering things into a basket. Not coffee, not pastries for a meeting. Dorothy handed him a receipt, which he quickly pocketed. Then she disappeared into the back room, returning moments later with a large paper bag with the Westside logo. James took it, checked his watch, and walked out, heading in the opposite direction from our office. I didn't think. I just moved. Leaving my car parked, I followed him at a distance, grateful for the busy lunchtime sidewalks that provided cover. 3 blocks later, he turned into an upscale ZAS apartment building I recognized, the Montgomery, where our out-of-town clients sometimes stayed. James nodded to the doorman, who greeted him by name. Not Mr. Parker or Sir, but James, like they were old friends. I waited across the street, heart racing, unsure what to do next. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Just as I was about to give up, James emerged empty-handed, checking his watch, before briskly walking back toward our office. The Wellington presentation. He was cutting it close. I waited until he was out of sight before approaching the building. The doorman, Carl, according to his nameplate, gave me a polite nod. "Excuse me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "My colleague just dropped off a package for one of our clients, but I'm afraid he may have delivered it to the wrong room." Tall guy, dark hair, just came in with a Westside coffee bag. Carl's expression shifted slightly. "Oh, Mr. Parker? He wasn't delivering anything, ma'am. He was visiting Ms. Reynolds in 814, like he does every week." My mind spun. Reynolds, Rebecca Reynolds, our newest junior account executive hired 3 months ago. Young, ambitious, with a marketing degree from Columbia and a father who golfed with our CEO. "Right, of course," I managed. "Rebecca. I forgot she was staying here temporarily." Carl smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Parker set up the corporate apartment for her himself. Very generous of your company. Corporate apartment. We didn't have corporate apartments. I thanked Carl and walked away, each step bringing more clarity than the last. The expense. Reports. The client entertainment budget that had nearly doubled since James took over. The special projects that required discretionary spending. He wasn't just stealing. He was building a private empire on the company dime. Fancy gifts, a luxury apartment, all while dating a junior employee whose career he directly influenced. By the time I reached my car, the Wellington presentation had already started. 17 missed calls and texts lit up my phone screen. From James, from our admin assistant, from my colleague Mia, asking if I was okay. I drove back to the office on autopilot, the coffee now cold in the carrier beside me. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors. Cheeks flushed, eyes wide with something between fear and determination. I recognized myself. The conference room doors were closed when I arrived, the presentation in full swing. Through the glass wall, I could see James gesturing at slides I had helped create, the Wellington team nodding appreciatively. No one seemed to have noticed the missing coffee. Mia rushed over as I set the carrier down at my desk. "Where have you been?" she whispered urgently. James was freaking out. He had to send an intern to get coffee from Starbucks. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Mia had started at Horizon the same week I had. We'd been close once, before promotions and politics had created a careful distance between us. "Mia, if you knew someone was doing something wrong, really wrong, what would you do?" She blinked, taken aback by the question. What kind of wrong are we talking about? The kind that could get people fired. The kind that might be illegal. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She glanced toward the conference room, then back at me. "This is about James, isn't it?" I nodded. "Come with me," she said, leading me to the small break room at the end of the hall. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face me. "What did you find out?" So I told her. Everything. Dorothy's warning, following James, the apartment, Rebecca Reynolds. With each word, I felt a weight lifting, replaced by something else. Resolve. Mia listened without interrupting, her expression changing from shock to anger. "That explains so much," she said when I finished. "The budget discrepancies I've been trying to reconcile for months. The receipts that never quite match up." She ran a hand through her hair. "Alex, do you have proof? Real proof? Not just what you saw?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I know where to look." The conference room doors opened, spilling the Wellington team and our executives into the hallway. Handshakes, smiles, promises of continued partnership. James standing at the center, accepting congratulations for a presentation I had spent weeks preparing. His eyes met mine across the office, narrowing slightly. I saw it then, beneath the charm and confidence, a flash of something cold, calculating. He knew I hadn't just been late. He knew something had changed. "What are you going to do?" Mia asked quietly. I watched as James escorted the clients to the elevator, his hand resting just a bit too familiarly on Rebecca Reynolds' lower back as she joined them. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago," I said. "I'm going to stop holding the ladder." That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities and consequences, replaying the day's events like a movie I couldn't pause. By morning, I had made my decision. I would gather evidence, document everything, and present it to our HR director, Vanessa Chen. Known for her uncompromising ethics, Vanessa had been with Horizon since its founding 15 years ago. If anyone would handle this properly, it would be her. I arrived at the office an hour early, before most of my colleagues. The quiet hum of the empty space felt like a cocoon as I settled at my desk and began methodically searching through our shared drive. As office manager, James had access to all department budgets, but so did I. A fact he seemed to have forgotten or underestimated. First, I pulled the expense reports for the past 6 months, organizing them chronologically in a separate folder on my personal drive. The pattern emerged quickly. Since James's promotion, client entertainment expenses had increased by 147%. Most charges came from upscale restaurants, wine shops, and, of course, Westside Coffee. Each receipt was vague, lacking itemization, with only James's scrawled signature as authorization. Morning, early bird. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Mia stood behind me, 2 coffee cups in hand. Real coffee, from the shop down the street, not the watery break room stuff. Thought you might need this, she said, placing one cup on my desk. You look like you haven't slept. Thanks, I said, quickly minimizing the spreadsheet on my screen. Just catching up on some work. Mia gave me a knowing look. Find anything interesting? I hesitated. Mia was my friend, but this was dangerous territory. If word got back to James before I had concrete evidence, she must have read my thoughts. Alex, I've been in accounting for 7 years. I've seen the numbers. I know something's off. She lowered her voice. And I'm not the only one who's noticed James's special treatment of certain people. The knot in my stomach loosened slightly. I'm building a case, I admitted, but I need more than just suspicious numbers. What about the corporate card statements? The ones that go directly to finance? I blinked. Of course, the original statements would show every transaction, not just what made it onto the expense reports. Can you access those? Mia smiled. Who do you think processes them before they go to the CFO? I'll email them to you. Just be careful. Delete them when you're done. By lunchtime, I had what I needed. The corporate card statements told a damning story. Charges from jewelry, stores disguised as client gifts, weekly payments to the Montgomery listed as accommodations for visiting clients, liquor deliveries, furniture purchases, all unauthorized, all buried under vague descriptions in the expense reports. Most troubling were the regular charges from a car service, always late at night or on weekends, always to and from the Montgomery. Company policy strictly prohibited using corporate funds for personal transportation. I was so engrossed in my findings that I didn't notice James approaching until his shadow fell across my desk. Working through lunch? That's dedication, he said, his tone light, but his eyes scanning my screen. I quickly switched to an email I'd kept open for this exact purpose. Just finalizing the monthly newsletter, I said, forcing a smile. The Wellington team sent some great testimonials after yesterday's meeting. About yesterday, James said, leaning against my desk. I was disappointed, Alex. The coffee run was a simple task, and you let the team down. That's not like you. His concern sounded genuine, which made it all the more unsettling. This was the James everyone admired, attentive, seemingly invested in his team's success. It had taken me too long to see through it. I'm sorry about that, I said, the apology tasting bitter on my tongue. There was an issue at the cafe. It won't happen again. He studied me for a moment longer than necessary. Good. We're a team, Alex. I need to know I can count on you. As he walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine. For the first time, I understood clearly what Dorothy had tried to warn me about. Men like James didn't just bend rules, they created an alternate reality where their actions were always justified, always someone else's responsibility. At 4:30, I sent Vanessa Chen an email requesting a confidential meeting the following morning. Her response came minutes later. 7:30 a.m. my office. That evening, I backed up all my findings to a secure cloud drive, then deleted the files from my work computer. Whatever happened next, I needed to be prepared. The next morning, I arrived at Vanessa's office clutching a folder containing printouts of everything I'd discovered. My hands were steady, but my heart raced as I knocked on her door. Come in, Alex, she called. Vanessa sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, her sharp eyes meeting mine as I entered. At 58, she commanded respect without asking for it, a skill I'd always admired. You mentioned this was confidential, she said, gesturing for me to sit. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath and placed the folder on her desk. I've discovered evidence that James Parker has been misusing company funds for personal expenses. It's been going on for months, possibly longer. If Vanessa was surprised, she didn't show it. She opened the folder and began methodically reviewing its contents, her expression unchanged. These are serious allegations, she said finally, removing her glasses. You understand that, don't you? I nodded. That's why I've documented everything carefully. The original card statements, the altered expense reports, witness, statements from the cafe where many of the transactions occurred. And this apartment, you're certain it's being paid for with company funds? Yes. The doorman confirmed James arranged it for Rebecca Reynolds, calling it a corporate apartment, but we don't have any such arrangement in our benefits package. The statements show monthly payments to the Montgomery classified as client, accommodations. Vanessa was silent for a long moment, studying the papers before her. There's also the matter of their relationship, she said. If he's dating a direct report while controlling her living situation, It creates a significant power imbalance, I finished, and violates our ethics policy. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. Why are you bringing this to me, Alex? You must realize this could have repercussions for everyone involved. The question caught me off guard. Because it's wrong, I said simply. Because I've spent 7 years upholding the values this company claims to stand for. Because if we look the other way, we're all complicit. Something shifted in Vanessa's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or resolution. I'll need to take this to the executive team, she said, closing the folder. In the meantime, continue your work as normal. Don't discuss this with anyone else, not even Mia. Can you do that? I nodded, relief washing over me. What happens now? Now, Vanessa said, standing. I do my job. This will be handled appropriately, Alex. You have my word. As I left her office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had done the right thing. I had spoken up. Whatever happened next, I could face it knowing I had stayed true to myself. Little did I know, the real test was just beginning. For 3 days, nothing happened. No meetings were called, no announcements were made. James continued his routine as if the ground beneath him wasn't about to give way. He delegated projects, led client calls, and even asked me to book a team dinner at Malways, an expensive steakhouse, using the company card, of course. I maintained my facade of normalcy, though every interaction felt like walking across thin ice. Twice, I caught James watching me with a calculating expression that disappeared the moment our eyes met. In those brief instances, I glimpsed something that sent shivers down my spine. Not anger or worry, but a cold assessment, like a predator evaluating a threat. On Thursday afternoon, Mia cornered me in the copy room, her voice barely above a whisper. Something's happening. Vanessa and the executive team have been in the conference room all morning. Doors locked, blinds closed. My pulse quickened. Did you hear anything? She shook her head. But James got called in about an hour ago. He hasn't come out yet. I should have felt victorious. Instead, anxiety coiled in my stomach like a spring. Thanks for telling me, I said, gathering my copies. I should get back to my desk. Alex, Mia caught my arm, her expression serious. Whatever happens, you did the right thing. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I returned to my desk, I noticed Rebecca Reynolds being escorted to the conference room by Vanessa's assistant. Her face was pale, her usual confidence replaced by visible nervousness. At 3:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. My office, 4 p.m. The next 45 minutes crawled by. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to what might be happening behind those conference room doors. Would they believe me? Would James somehow charm his way out of this, as he had so many other situations? Would I become the troublemaker, the one who couldn't be a team player? When I finally knocked on Vanessa's door at 4 sharp, I was surprised to find her alone. I had half expected the entire executive team, perhaps even James himself, waiting to confront me. Sit down, Alex, she said, her tone giving nothing away. I lowered myself into the chair across from her desk, hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. First, I want to thank you for bringing this matter to my attention, Vanessa began. It can't have been an easy decision. It wasn't, I admitted. But it was the right one. She nodded. The evidence you provided was compelling. We've spent the past 3 days conducting a thorough investigation, including auditing all expense reports for the past year and interviewing several staff members. I held my breath, waiting for the but that seemed inevitable. James Parker has been terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air between us. I blinked, processing what she'd said. Terminated? Today? As of 2 hours ago. He's been escorted from the building and his access has been revoked. We're also pursuing restitution for the misappropriated funds, which our preliminary audit places at just over $37,000. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by disbelief. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. In matters like this, decisive action is necessary, Vanessa said. Once we confirmed your allegations, the decision was unanimous among the executive team. And Rebecca? Vanessa's expression softened. Slightly. That situation is complicated. She's been placed on administrative leave while we sort through everything. It appears she was both complicit in and a victim of James's manipulation. The apartment lease has been terminated, but we're providing temporary housing assistance while she secures new accommodations. I nodded, unsure how to feel about that. Rebecca had accepted benefits she knew weren't rightfully hers, but James had been the one with the power, the one who created the situation. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Vanessa continued, straightening a stack of papers on her desk. "With James's departure, we have an immediate opening for a senior account manager." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh?" "The position would involve overseeing the Wellington account, along with 3 other major clients. It's a significant step up in terms of responsibility and compensation." She looked at me directly. "The executive team would like to offer you the role." The words seemed to echo in my ears. After years of being overlooked, of watching others advance past me, here it was, the recognition I'd worked for. But instead of joy, I felt a strange hesitation. "Is something wrong?" Vanessa asked, noticing my silence. "I'm honored by the offer," I said slowly, "but I need to ask, is this because of what I did? Because I reported James?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, studying me with newfound interest. "Would that bother you if it were?" "Yes," I said honestly. "I want to be promoted based on my work, my skills, my contribution to this company. Not as a reward for being a whistleblower." A small smile touched Vanessa's lips. "And that, Alex, is precisely why you're being offered this position. Your integrity, your commitment to doing what's right even when it's difficult, those qualities are far rarer than marketing expertise." She slid a folder across the desk. "This contains the formal offer, including salary details and benefits. Take the weekend to think about it." As I stood to leave, folder in hand, Vanessa added, "For what it's worth, your name has been in consideration for advancement for some time. James's repeated blocking of your promotion reviews was another red flag that emerged during our investigation." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet it stung. All those times I'd wondered why I wasn't moving forward. All the extra projects and late nights trying to prove my worth, while James had been deliberately holding me back. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. In the hallway outside Vanessa's office, I paused, letting the events of the past week wash over me. James was gone. The truth had come out. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Yet as I walked back to my desk, I realized this wasn't the victorious moment I had imagined. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public vindication, just the quiet removal of someone who had betrayed the trust placed in him, and the sobering knowledge that systems only work when people have the courage to speak up when they fail. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected tension hanging over the office. Though the weekend had given me time to process the events of the previous week, I wasn't prepared for the strange mix of curiosity, resentment, and uncertainty that greeted me when I stepped off the elevator. Conversation stopped as I walked past. Glances followed me to my desk. By mid-morning, I realized I had become the center of an unspoken controversy. Some colleagues offered subtle nods of approval or quiet, words of support. Others kept their distance, their expressions carefully neutral. News had spread, as it always does in an office of 30 people, but the narrative had clearly fractured along the way. Mia appeared at my desk just before lunch, 2 salads in hand. "Thought you might want to eat in today," she said, setting one container in front of me. "The break room's a bit charged." I accepted the salad gratefully. "That bad?" "Let's just say opinions are divided." She pulled up a chair. "Some people think you're a hero for exposing James. Others think you should have handled it differently." "How exactly should I have handled systematic fraud?" I asked, stabbing at a piece of lettuce. "According to Diane from Creative, you should have confronted James directly before going to HR." Mia rolled her eyes. "And Kevin thinks you were just jealous of James's success." Of course Kevin would think that. He and James had been weekend golf buddies since James started at Horizon. "What about you?" I asked quietly. "Do you regret helping me?" Mia looked surprised by the question. "Not for a second. What James did was wrong. Period. The company will be better without him." She lowered her voice. "Besides, I heard they're conducting a full audit of everything he touched. It's worse than what you found." A knot formed in my stomach. Worse how? Client billing discrepancies. Projects charged at higher rates than contracted, with the difference disappearing into accounts only James managed. She shook her head. "The Wellington team is livid. Apparently they've been overcharged nearly $50,000 over the past year." This was exactly what I'd feared, that James's deception extended beyond expense accounts and company perks, potentially damaging client relationships that had taken years to build. "Has Vanessa said anything about the senior manager position?" Mia asked, changing the subject. I nodded. I accepted this morning, starting next week, officially. Alex, that's fantastic! Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. It's about time they recognized what you bring to this place. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. Though the timing makes it complicated. Because people might think you did it for the promotion? Exactly. Mia set down her fork, her expression serious. Listen to me. Anyone who thinks that doesn't know you at all. You took an enormous risk reporting James. There was no guarantee it would end with a promotion. It could just as easily have backfired. She was right, of course. When I'd gathered that evidence, when I'd walked into Vanessa's office, I hadn't been thinking about advancement. I'd been thinking about right and wrong, about the values that had guided me throughout my career. I know, I said. I just wish that it felt better, Mia finished for me, that there was some big, satisfying moment where everyone realized you were right all along. I nodded, surprised by how accurately she'd captured my feelings. Real integrity rarely comes with applause, Alex. That's what makes it integrity. The rest of the week passed in a blur of transition meetings. Vanessa had assembled a crisis team to address the Wellington situation, with me at its center. By Friday, we had developed a comprehensive plan, full disclosure of the billing issues, a complete audit of their account, and a significant credit applied to future projects. It wouldn't erase the breach of trust, but it was a start. As I packed up my desk Friday evening, preparing for my move to the corner office James had once occupied, an email notification appeared on my screen. From Rebecca Reynolds. My finger hovered over the delete button. I hadn't spoken to Rebecca since that day, hadn't seen her since she was placed on administrative leave. Part of me didn't want to hear whatever justification she might offer for her role in James's scheme. But another part, the part that had pushed me to speak up in the first place, knew I needed to listen. I opened the email. Alex, I've spent 2 weeks trying to write this email. Nothing seems adequate. By now, you know about my relationship with James and the apartment. What you may not know is how it started, with lies about a company housing program for promising new hires, with subtle threats about my future at Horizon if I wasn't a team player, with isolation from colleagues who might have told me the truth. None of this excuses my actions. I should have questioned things more, should have seen the red flags. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness, but to thank you. Your courage saved me from a situation that was spiraling out of control. Vanessa told me you advocated for me to receive housing assistance after the apartment lease was terminated. You had no obligation to show me that kindness after what happened. It says everything about your character. I've resigned from Horizon, effective today. It's the right decision for everyone. I'm returning to New York to rebuild my career the right way this time. Thank you for speaking up when no one else would. Rebecca. I read the email twice, emotions conflicting within me. Relief that she recognized the gravity of what had happened. Sadness for how James had manipulated her. A strange sense of closure. I typed a brief reply. Rebecca, thank you for your honesty. Everyone deserves a second chance to get things right. I wish you all the best in New York. Alex. As I sent the email, Vanessa appeared in my doorway. All packed for the big move? She asked, glancing at the boxes on my desk. Almost, I said, closing my laptop. Just tying up a few loose ends. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. The Wellington team called today. They've decided to renew their contract with the condition that you personally oversee their account. I blinked in surprise. After everything that happened? They said, and I quote, "We want to work with someone we can trust." Vanessa smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed her usually serious face. It seems your reputation for integrity extends beyond these walls. As Vanessa left, I sat back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Trust. Such a simple concept, yet so fragile, so easily broken. James had shattered it with his deception. Now it would be my job to rebuild it, one honest interaction at a time. My phone buzzed with a text. From Dorothy at Westside Coffee. Heard the news. Proud of you, honey. First coffee next week is on me. I smiled, thinking about how different my life had become because of one whispered warning, one moment of courage from a silver-haired barista who believed in doing the right thing. Sometimes I realized the most important voices are the quietest ones, the ones that speak truth when it would be easier to remain silent. My first day as senior account manager began with a series of surprises. When I arrived at the office, I found my new corner space transformed. Gone was James's ostentatious furniture, the Italian leather chair, the imposing mahogany desk that dominated the room. In their place stood sleek, modern pieces that somehow made the office feel both professional and welcoming. Ayao. Note on the desk read simply, "A fresh start deserves a fresh space. Vanessa." It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one, an acknowledgement that this wasn't just a transfer of title, but a complete reset of how things would be done. I set down my bag and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. From this height, Denver's skyline stretched before me, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. The view was spectacular, but it came with a weight of responsibility I could feel settling onto my shoulders. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Mia stood in the doorway, grinning widely. "Look at you," she said, gesturing around the office. "Corner view, executive chair, actual sunlight. You've officially made it." I laughed. "I'm still getting used to it. Wanna come in?" She stepped inside, looking around appreciatively. "Much better without all of James's ego-stroking decorations. Did you know he had a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor? Why am I not surprised?" I moved to the visitor chairs, comfortable but not extravagant, and motioned for her to join me. "I could use some advice, actually. I'm meeting with the team in an hour, and I'm not sure what to say." Mia sat down, her expression turning thoughtful. "They're nervous, you know. After James, after everything that happened, they don't know what to expect from you. That's what I'm worried about. I don't want to be James 2.0, but I also can't just be their friend anymore. There's a line now." "Then draw it clearly," Mia said simply. "Be honest about the changes, about your expectations, about how you want things to run differently, but also show them you're still you, the person who cares about doing things right." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The Wellington team, calling with questions about their upcoming campaign. As I took the call, Mia gave me a thumbs up and slipped out, closing the door behind her. An hour later, I stood before my team in the small conference room. 6 faces looked back at me. Some curious, some apprehensive, all waiting to see what kind of leader I would be. "I know the past few weeks have been challenging," I began, deciding honesty was the only approach that made sense. "Changes in leadership are always difficult, especially under these circumstances. You all have questions, concerns, maybe even doubts about where we go from here. That's normal." I paused, making eye contact with each person. What happened with James violated the trust that should exist between colleagues, between a company and its clients. Trust that will take time to rebuild. I can't promise there won't be more changes as we move forward. What I can promise is transparency, fairness, and a commitment to doing things the right way, even when it's not the easy way. Rachel, one of our junior copywriters, raised her hand tentatively. "Will we be continuing with the same workflow system James implemented? The one with the daily check-ins?" I thought about the system Rachel referenced, an excessive micromanagement tool James had used to track every minute of the team's day, creating unnecessary stress and paperwork. "No," I said, firmly. "We're going back to weekly progress reports. I trust you all to manage your time and priorities. My door is always open if you need guidance, but I won't be looking over your shoulders every hour." The relief in the room was palpable. Questions continued, about client assignments, budget approvals, upcoming projects, and with each answer, I could feel the atmosphere shifting. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, like ice beginning to thaw. By the time the meeting ended, something had changed. The wariness hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been replaced by something that felt like cautious optimism. As the team filed out, Kevin lingered behind. Of all my colleagues, he had been the most visibly upset by James's departure, the most openly skeptical of my promotion. "Got a minute?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "Of course," I said, bracing myself for whatever challenge he might throw my way. Kevin closed the conference room door. "I owe you an apology." Of all the things I had expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. "I said some things last week," he continued, clearly uncomfortable, "about your motives for reporting James. It was out of line." I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "What changed your mind?" He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The Wellington audit. I saw the numbers myself. There's no way that was just sloppy bookkeeping." He shook his head. "James and I were friends, or I thought we were. It's hard to accept that someone you trusted was capable of that kind of deception." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. "Kevin, always so confident, so certain of his opinions, looked genuinely shaken. "I understand," I said softly. "It's never easy to realize you've been misled by someone you respected." "How did you know?" he asked. "What made you suspicious in the first place?" I thought about Dorothy, about that moment in the coffee shop that had changed. "Everything. Sometimes the truth finds you when you're not looking for it," I said. "The real question is what you do once you know." Kevin nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think you'll do a better job than he ever did. At least you actually care about the work." It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from Kevin, it felt like a significant olive branch. "Thank you. I'm counting on everyone to help make this transition work, including you." The next few weeks were a careful balancing act. Rebuilding client relationships damaged by James's actions. Restructuring workflows to be more efficient but less controlling. Creating space for team members to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Some days were exhausting, others exhilarating. Through it all, I maintained my weekly coffee. Runs to West Side. Dorothy always greeted me with a warm smile, and often a piece of wisdom disguised as casual conversation. She never mentioned James or what had happened, but there was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared knowledge of how a simple act of speaking truth can ripple outward in unexpected ways. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office after a particularly long day, Vanessa stopped by my door. "Walk with me," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. We rode the elevator down in silence and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. For several minutes we walked without speaking, the streetlights casting long shadows as dusk settled over the city. "The board reviewed the Wellington account today," Vanessa finally said. "They were impressed with how you've handled the situation. The client is satisfied, the billing issues have been resolved, and their new campaign is on track to launch next month." "That's good to hear," I said, wondering why this conversation couldn't have happened in the office. Vanessa stopped walking, turning to face me directly. "They also reviewed my recommendation for a structural change in our leadership team." My pulse quickened. "What kind of change?" "The creation of a new position, Director of Client Ethics and Compliance, someone to oversee all financial interactions with clients, someone who understands both the business side and the ethical implications of our decisions." She paused. "I recommended you for the role." I stood speechless, processing her words. "It would be a significant step up," she continued. "More responsibility, more visibility across the company. But after watching you these past weeks, I believe you're exactly the person we need." I don't know what to say," I managed finally. Vanessa smiled, that rare, genuine smile I was slowly becoming more familiar with. "You don't need to decide right now. Take some time to think about it." She started walking again. "But know this, Alex. Sometimes our most difficult moments reveal our true purpose. What happened with James was unfortunate, but it showed us, and you, what you're capable of." As we circled back toward the office building, I thought about how much had changed in just 1 month, about how one moment of courage had set in motion events I could never have predicted, about how speaking up, even when it was frightening, had not only exposed wrongdoing, but had opened doors I hadn't even known existed. "I'll think about it," I promised as we reached the entrance. Vanessa nodded. "That's all I ask." She checked her watch. "I have a dinner meeting. Enjoy your evening, Alex." As I watched her walk away, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The uncertainty I'd felt that first day in James's office, my office, had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not the false bravado James had projected, but something steadier, more genuine. I pulled out my phone and called Mia. "Feel like grabbing dinner? I have some news to share." "Good news or I need wine news?" she asked. I smiled, looking up at the office building that had been the center of my professional life for so long. Let's just say, it's about the future, and I think it's looking brighter than ever. 3 months passed with a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Winter settled over Denver, transforming the city with a pristine blanket of snow and bringing with it the frantic energy of holiday campaigns and year-end reports. In my new role as Director of Client Ethics and Compliance, I divided my time between managing the Wellington account and implementing systems to prevent another situation like James's from ever happening again. The position came with challenges I hadn't anticipated. Some department heads resisted the additional oversight, viewing it as unnecessary bureaucracy rather than protection. Others embraced the changes, relieved to have clear guidelines that removed ambiguity from financial decisions. Through it all, Vanessa remained a steadfast ally, backing my initiatives with the full weight of her authority. By December, I had established a new approval process for all client expenses, created transparent reporting structures that made budget allocations visible to everyone involved with an account, and instituted quarterly ethics. Training for all client-facing staff. Small changes, perhaps, but ones that would make it much harder for someone to exploit the system the way James had. On a snowy Tuesday afternoon, as I reviewed quarterly projections in my office, Mia appeared in my doorway, bundled in her winter coat. "Don't tell me you forgot," she said, eyebrows raised. I glanced at the clock on my computer. 4:30 p.m., our weekly coffee meeting at Westside. "I didn't forget," I lied, quickly saving my work. "Just lost track of time." Mia rolled her eyes, unconvinced. "You've been doing that a lot lately. All work and no play makes Alex a dull director." "Very funny," I said, grabbing my coat and scarf. "Lead the way." Outside, the temperature had dropped, and fat snowflakes drifted lazily from a steel gray sky. Walked the 6 blocks to Westside in comfortable silence, our boots crunching on freshly fallen snow. Despite the cold, the familiar journey felt good, a reminder of the world beyond spreadsheets and policy documents. Westside coffee was warm and inviting, strings of white lights adding a festive glow to the mismatched furniture and vintage posters. The smell of cinnamon and cloves mingled with rich espresso, creating a cocoon of comfort against the winter chill. Dorothy spotted us from behind the counter, her face lighting up with a smile that made the fine lines around her eyes deepen. "My favorite customers. The usual?" "Please," I said, unwinding my scarf. "And maybe one of those gingerbread cookies if you have any left." "For you? I'd bake a fresh batch," she winked, turning to prepare our drinks. Mia and I settled at our regular table near the window, watching snowflakes dance in the glow of street lamps. "So," Mia said, shedding her coat, "are you going to tell me what's bothering you, or do I have to guess?" I looked at her, startled. "What makes you think something's bothering me?" "Alex, I've known you for 7 years. You get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're wrestling with something." She tapped her own forehead. "Right there. It's been there for days." I sighed, caught. Is it that obvious? Only to people who actually pay attention. Dorothy arrived with our drinks, a cappuccino with an extra shot for me, a chai latte for Mia, and placed a gingerbread cookie on a small plate between us. "On the house," she said with a smile, before returning to the counter. I broke the cookie in half, offering a piece to Mia. "The board wants to expand my role," I said finally. "They're proposing a company-wide ethics committee, with me as the chair." Mia's eyes widened. "Alex, that's fantastic. It's exactly what you've been working toward." "It is," I agreed, "but it would mean giving up the Wellington account, stepping away from direct client work entirely." Understanding dawned in Mia's expression. "And you're not sure you want to do that?" I nodded, warming my hands around my coffee cup. I love the client side, the creativity, the problem-solving, seeing campaigns come to life. The ethics work is important, but it's different. More abstract, Mia supplied. Less immediate gratification. Exactly. I took a sip of my cappuccino, letting the rich flavor ground me. "The board meeting is tomorrow. I need to give them my decision." Mia considered this, her expression thoughtful. "What does your gut tell you?" "That's the problem. My gut is sending mixed signals." I stared out at the snowy street, watching pedestrians hurry past, collars turned up against the cold. Part of me thinks I should be grateful for the opportunity. It's a significant promotion, more influence, more responsibility. But another part wonders if I'm being pushed in this direction because of what happened with James. If they see me as the ethics person now, rather than a marketing professional who happens to care about doing things right. Mia was quiet for a moment, stirring her chai. "Can I tell you something I've observed these past few months?" I nodded. "When you talk about the Wellington campaign, your eyes light up. When you explain a new creative direction or share client feedback, there's an energy to your voice." She leaned forward. "But when you talk about the ethics systems you're building, there's something else. A kind of quiet pride, a certainty I've never seen in you before. Like you've found something that really matters." Her observation caught me off guard. "You think I should take the committee position?" "I think you should recognize that sometimes our paths change for a reason. Maybe your experience with James didn't just expose fraud. Maybe it revealed your purpose." As we finished our drinks, Mia's words echoed in my mind. Purpose. It wasn't a term I'd applied to my career before. I had been good at my job, dedicated to doing it well, but I hadn't thought of it as a calling. Dorothy came to clear our cups, her movement slower than usual, a slight stiffness in her hands as she gathered the empty mugs. "Everything all right, Dorothy?" I asked, noticing her wince as she lifted the tray. "Just these old bones protesting the cold," she said with a dismissive wave. "Arthritis acts up something fierce in winter." "How long have you been working today?" Mia asked. "Oh, since about 5 this morning. Tuesdays I open and close, our manager's day off." I exchanged a glance with Mia, concerned. "That's a 14-hour shift. Isn't there anyone who can cover for you?" Dorothy shrugged. "We're short-staffed this month. 2 of our college kids went home for the holidays." She must have noticed our worried expressions because she added, "Don't you fret about me. I've been working since before either of you were born. Keeps me young." As she walked away, Mia shook her head. She must be in her 70s. No one should be working 14-hour shifts at that age. I watched Dorothy greet new customers, her smile warm despite the obvious fatigue in her eyes. This woman, who had changed the course of my career with a single whispered warning, was still here day after day, serving others without complaint. "You know," I said slowly, "I never really thanked her properly for what she did that day." "Maybe it's time you did," Mia suggested gently. As we prepared to leave, I approached the counter where Dorothy was wiping down the espresso machine. "Dorothy, do you have a minute?" She turned, brushing a stray strand of silver hair from her face. "For you? Always. I just wanted to say what you did that day, warning me about James. It took courage, and it changed everything. Not just for me, but for a lot of people at Horizon." Dorothy's eyes softened. "Honey, I've been watching people my whole life. You learn to see the good ones, the ones worth speaking up for." She patted my hand. "You would have figured it out eventually. I just sped things along a bit. Still, I owe you a debt I can't repay." She chuckled. "Nonsense. You repay it by doing the same for someone else someday. That's how it works." As Mia and I walked back to the office through gently falling snow, I felt a clarity that had been eluding me for weeks. Dorothy's simple wisdom about seeing the good ones, about passing forward the courage to speak truth, resonated with something fundamental within me. By the time we reached Horizon's building, my decision was made. The next morning, I presented my answer to the board. I would chair the ethics committee, but with one condition, that I could continue managing the Wellington account through their spring campaign launch. It would mean a heavier workload for a few months, but it would also provide time to properly transition the client to a new manager of my choosing. Vanessa, sitting at the head of the boardroom table, nodded her approval. A reasonable compromise. Any objections? There were none. As the meeting adjourned, Vanessa held me back with a light touch on my arm. "You found your voice, Alex. It suits you." Later that day, as snow continued to fall outside my office window, I drafted an email to the entire company announcing the formation of the ethics committee and inviting applications from staff interested in serving. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of replies within the hour, colleagues from every department expressing their support and interest. It seemed I wasn't the only one who believed in building something better from the ashes of James's deception. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I paused at my office window, looking out at the city lights glimmering through the snowfall. Somewhere out there, James was rebuilding his life, perhaps learning from his mistakes, perhaps not. Rebecca was in New York, starting fresh, and I was here, charting a course I could never have imagined 3 months ago. All because of one moment of truth in a coffee shop. All because I had listened. January brought with it a fresh start, literally. A pipe burst in our office building over the holiday break, flooding 3 floors and forcing Horizon to temporarily relocate to a co-working space downtown, while repairs were completed. The change in environment, though challenging logistically, created an unexpected sense of camaraderie among the staff. Without the physical barriers of separate offices and departments, collaboration flourished, and the ethics committee I now chaired found itself at the center of many cross-functional discussions. The committee, 6 members selected from different departments, met weekly in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Today's agenda focused on finalizing our mission statement and establishing priorities for the first quarter. "I still think we need stronger language around accountability," said Marcus from legal, tapping his pen against his notepad. "Something that makes it clear there are consequences for ethical breaches." Priya from creative disagreed. But if we focus too heavily on punitive measures, we risk creating a culture of fear rather than one of integrity. The debate continued, passionate but respectful. I listened, taking notes, occasionally steering the conversation back on track when it veered into theoretical territory. This was the part of the role I found most challenging, balancing different perspectives while moving toward concrete actions. What if we approach it differently? I suggested finally. Instead of framing it as rules and consequences, what if we emphasize transparency and support? Creating systems where ethical dilemmas can be discussed openly, where asking questions is encouraged rather than seen as a sign of weakness. The room grew quiet, considering. Like preventative medicine versus treating the disease, offered Dr. Chen from our healthcare division. Creating an environment where ethical breaches are less likely to occur in the first place. Exactly, I nodded. We want a culture where doing the right thing is the path of least resistance, not an uphill battle. By the end of the meeting, we had a draft mission statement that balanced accountability with support, emphasizing our commitment to creating an environment where ethical behavior was recognized and rewarded. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a foundation we could build upon. As the committee members gathered their materials and filed out, Vanessa, who had observed the meeting from the back of the room, approached me. "Impressive facilitation," she said. "You have a gift for finding common ground." "They did most of the work," I deflected. "I just kept us on schedule." Vanessa shook her head, amused by my modesty. "Don't underestimate what you're building here, Alex. It's not just about preventing another James Parker situation. It's about defining who we are as a company, what we stand for." Her words stayed with me as I packed up my laptop and headed for the elevator. The temporary office was closer to Westside Coffee than our regular building, and I found myself walking there almost daily, drawn by both the excellent espresso and the comforting presence of Dorothy. Today, however, as I pushed open the cafe door, I was greeted not by Dorothy's familiar smile, but by a young barista I didn't recognize. "Welcome to Westside," he said cheerfully. "What can I get started for you?" "Thanks, but I'm actually looking for Dorothy. Is she working today?" The barista's expression fell slightly. "Dorothy's been out sick for a couple of weeks now. Flu, I think. Pretty bad one." Concern immediately tightened my chest. "Do you know how she's doing? Is anyone checking on her?" He shrugged apologetically. "I'm just covering shifts. Management might know more." I ordered a coffee out of habit, but my mind was elsewhere. Dorothy lived alone. She had mentioned once that her husband had passed years ago, and her children lived out of state. At her age, a serious flu could be dangerous, especially if she had no one to help. Back at the office, I couldn't concentrate. The image of Dorothy, alone and ill in her apartment, kept intruding on my thoughts. By mid-afternoon, I had made a decision. I approached Mia's desk, where she was deep in spreadsheet analysis. "I need a favor," I said without preamble. She looked up, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Dorothy's been out sick for 2 weeks. No one at Westside seems to know details. I'm worried about her." Understanding dawned in Mia's eyes. "You want to check on her?" "Yes, but I don't know where she lives." I hesitated, feeling slightly intrusive. "The cafe might have her address, but they probably wouldn't give it to me." Mia was already typing on her keyboard. "What's her last name?" "Miller, I think. Dorothy Miller." A few minutes of searching yielded an address in a modest apartment complex about 20 minutes from downtown. "I can't be certain it's her," Mia cautioned. "But the age range matches, and it's the only Dorothy Miller in that part of the city." I thanked her, making a quick decision. "I'm going to take the rest of the afternoon off. Can you let the team know if anyone's looking for me?" Mia nodded. "Of course. Let me know if she needs anything. I make a mean chicken soup." An hour later, after stopping at a grocery store to gather supplies, soup, fresh bread, orange juice, tea, and a small bouquet of cheerful daisies, I stood outside apartment 302 gathering my courage. It felt strange, almost invasive, to appear uninvited at the home of someone I knew only from brief interactions over a coffee counter. But Dorothy had taken a risk for me once. The least I could do was check on her well-being. I knocked gently. For a long moment, there was silence, and I wondered if I had the wrong address after all. Then came the sound of shuffling footsteps, a pause, and finally the door opened a crack. Dorothy peered out, her silver hair uncombed, her face pale and drawn. Recognition slowly dawned in her tired eyes. "Alex, what on earth are you doing here?" "I stopped by Westside and heard you were sick," I explained. lifting the grocery bag slightly. I brought some supplies. May I come in? She hesitated, embarrassment flitting across her features. The place is a mess. I haven't been up to cleaning. I'm not here to judge your housekeeping, I assured her, just to make sure you're okay. Reluctantly, she opened the door wider, revealing a small but cozy apartment. Books lined the walls, sharing space with framed photographs and colorful knitted throws. Despite her warning, the space was tidy, if a bit dusty, the home of someone who took pride in their surroundings but had been too ill to maintain them. The kitchen's through there, she said, gesturing weakly before lowering herself into a worn armchair. I'd offer to make tea, but honestly, I'm still a bit wobbly on my feet. That's why I'm here, I said, heading toward the kitchen. You sit, I'll make tea. As water boiled and soup warmed on the stove, I arranged the daisies in a simple glass vase I found under the sink. Dorothy watched from her chair, a mixture of gratitude and something like embarrassment in her expression. You didn't have to do all this, she said as I brought her a cup of tea with honey. I wanted to, I replied simply. You helped me when I needed it. Besides, everyone needs someone checking on them when they're under the weather. Over soup and tea, Dorothy gradually opened up about her illness. Influenza that had turned into pneumonia, a brief hospitalization, and now a slow recovery at home. Her daughter in Seattle had wanted her to fly out and recuperate there, but Dorothy had refused. I'm too old to be uprooting myself every time I catch a bug, she said stubbornly. Besides, who would keep an eye on all those young baristas if I left? They'd be giving away free muffins to every pretty face that walked in. I laughed, relieved to see glimpses of her usual spirit returning. When do you think you'll be back at work? She sighed, the question touching on a deeper concern. That's the thing, dear. The doctor says I need to take it easy for at least another month. Reduced hours, no heavy lifting. She shook her head. Westside can't hold my position that long. They've already hired a replacement. The unfairness of it struck me immediately. After all your years of service? Can they do that? They can, and they have, she said matter-of-factly. Small businesses, no unions. Colorado's an at-will employment state. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Don't worry about me. I've got a bit saved. Social Security. I'll manage until I find something else. But as we continued talking, the reality of her situation became clearer. At 72, Dorothy's job options were limited. Her savings, while carefully managed, wouldn't last forever. And Westside had been more than just employment. It had been her community, her purpose, her daily connection to the world. As I washed our dishes in her tiny kitchen sink, an idea began forming in my mind. It wasn't fully developed yet, more intuition than plan, but I felt a growing certainty that there was something I could do, something that would honor Dorothy's kindness while addressing a need I'd been contemplating for Horizon. By the time I left Dorothy's apartment, promising to return in a few days, with more groceries and perhaps some books from the library, my idea had solidified into a proposal I was eager to present to Vanessa. The next morning, I arrived at the temporary office early, using the quiet hours to draft my thoughts into a coherent proposal. By the time Vanessa arrived at 8, I was waiting by her makeshift office, document in hand. You have that look, she said as she unlocked her door. The one that means you're about to suggest something that will create more work for both of us. I smiled, following her inside. It's about our ethics initiative. I think we're missing something important. And what's that? She settled behind her desk, giving me her full attention. A human connection. Someone people can talk to informally, outside the official channels. Someone with life experience and good judgment, who can offer guidance without the weight of corporate authority. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You're not suggesting a therapist? No, I said, placing my proposal on her desk. I'm suggesting an ethics advocate. Someone who can be a sounding board, a first stop for employees who have concerns or questions but aren't ready to file a formal report. And you have someone in mind for this role. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I do. Her name is Dorothy Miller, and she's the person who first alerted me to James's fraud. She has incredible instincts about people, decades of experience listening and observing, and no agenda except doing what's right. Vanessa picked up my proposal, scanning the first page with an unreadable expression. A 72-year-old former barista with no corporate experience, she summarized. The board will have questions. I'm sure they will, I acknowledged. But I believe Dorothy brings something we can't find in a traditional corporate hire. Authentic wisdom and a genuine moral compass. Plus, she already proved her ethics when she risked her job to warn me about James. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, reading through the details of my proposal. Finally, she looked up. "It's unorthodox," she said. "But then again, so was promoting you after you exposed our most successful account manager." A small smile touched her lips. "That decision has worked out rather well for Horizon." Hope bloomed in my chest. "Does that mean you'll consider it?" "I'll do more than consider it," Vanessa said, closing the folder. "I'll present it to the board myself, but first," she fixed me with her penetrating gaze, "I want to meet this Dorothy who's inspired such loyalty in you." 3 days later, Dorothy Miller came to Horizon's temporary offices for an informal interview with Vanessa. Despite her still recovering health, she arrived promptly, dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit that looked like it had been carefully preserved from another era. I waited anxiously in the common area, trying not to check my watch every 2 minutes. When the conference room door finally opened after nearly an hour, Vanessa emerged first, her expression giving nothing away. Dorothy followed, her face flushed with what I hoped was excitement rather than fever. "Well?" I asked, unable to contain myself. Vanessa and Dorothy exchanged a look, and then Vanessa allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. "Pending board approval, which I anticipate receiving, Horizon will be creating a new position. Ethics advocate and community liaison. Part-time, flexible hours, with health benefits." Relief and joy washed over me. "And Dorothy?" "Has accepted our offer," Vanessa confirmed. "Contingent on her doctor's approval to return to work part-time next month." Dorothy reached out, squeezing my hand. "It seems I'll be the one thanking you now," she said, her eyes bright with emotion, "for seeing value in an old woman's experience." "Not value," I corrected gently. "Wisdom, the kind that comes from a lifetime of watching people, of caring enough to speak up when it matters." As Vanessa excused herself to return to her other responsibilities, Dorothy and I sat in the common area, discussing her new role and how it might evolve. Her excitement was palpable, her mind already generating ideas for how to make the position meaningful. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I spoke to you that day at Westside, I never imagined where it would lead, for either of us." "Neither did I," admitted. "But that's the thing about truth. Once it's spoken, you can't predict where it will take you. You can only decide whether to follow." Dorothy nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And look where it's taken us. Not bad for a coffee shop conversation, is it?" Not bad at all, I thought. Not bad at all. Spring arrived in Denver with a burst of color and renewal. The city seemed to exhale, collectively as winter's grip loosened, revealing tender green shoots and cherry blossoms dotting the urban landscape. At Horizon, we had returned to our renovated offices, the water damage from January's burst pipe now just another story to tell. The ethics committee had been operating officially for 3 months, with Dorothy's unique role as ethics advocate proving even more valuable than I'd anticipated. Her office, a small but welcoming space near the employee lounge, had become a regular stop for staff at all levels. Some came with specific concerns, others simply to chat, but all left with a clearer sense of direction. Dorothy's gift for listening without judgment, for asking the right questions at the right time, had transformed our company culture in subtle but profound ways. Today marked a significant milestone, the launch of the Wellington campaign we'd been developing since before James's departure. After months of planning, refinement, and careful rebuilding of trust, the campaign would go live across multiple platforms, a bold, innovative approach to healthcare marketing that pushed boundaries while maintaining absolute ethical integrity. I stood at the back of WOW, our largest conference room, watching as my team presented the final elements to the Wellington executives. Pride swelled in my chest, not just for the campaign itself, but for the journey we'd taken to reach this point. Every person in that room had contributed, had overcome the shadow of James's deception to create something authentic and powerful. As the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, I caught sight of a familiar figure slipping into the room. Vanessa nodded slightly in acknowledgement, her presence a silent affirmation of the importance of this moment. Michael Wellington, the company's founder and CEO, rose from his seat, his distinguished silver hair and tailored suit projecting the confidence that had built his healthcare empire. "I've sat through hundreds of, campaign presentations in my 40 years in this business," he began, his deep voice commanding attention. "Most are forgettable. Some are adequate. A few are truly exceptional." He paused, scanning the faces of my team. "This one belongs in that last category." A ripple of pride moved through the room. "But what impresses me most," Wellington continued, isn't just the creativity or strategy. Though both are outstanding, it's the transparency with which this campaign was developed. The ethical considerations built into every stage. The honest dialogue when challenges arose. His gaze found mine at the back of the room. 6 months ago, I was ready to end our relationship with Horizon. The trust had been broken, and in my experience, that's rarely repairable. He smiled slightly. I'm pleased to say I was wrong. Under Alex Morgan's leadership, this team has not only restored our confidence, but elevated it to new heights. The formal meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, the Wellington team clearly energized by what they'd seen. As people began filtering out, Michael Wellington approached me directly. A word in private, if you have a moment. We moved to a small side office, away from the celebratory chatter. Wellington closed the door, his expression shifting to something more personal, less corporate. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, not just for the campaign, but for how you handled the situation with James Parker. I tensed slightly at the mention of James's name, still a rare occurrence in our office. I was just doing what needed to be done. Wellington shook his head. It's never that simple, and we both know it. You took a significant risk bringing that fraud to light. Many would have looked the other way, protected their own interests. I couldn't do that, I said simply. No, you couldn't. That's character. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed an envelope, which is why I wanted to speak with you about an opportunity. My heart skipped. Was he offering me a job? The thought of leaving Horizon now, just as our ethics initiative was gaining momentum, just as Dorothy was finding her place. I sit on the board of the National Business Ethics Alliance, Wellington explained, handing me the envelope. Every year we recognize individuals who have demonstrated exceptional moral courage in the corporate world. This year, I'd like to nominate you for our Integrity in Leadership Award. Relief and surprise mingled as I accepted the envelope, which contained information about the nomination process and the award ceremony to be held in Chicago that summer. I'm honored, but are you sure I'm the right candidate? All I did was report wrongdoing. Wellington regarded me with a knowing smile. Ms. Morgan, in my experience, the phrase, all I did, usually precedes something significant. Reporting wrongdoing when it threatens your livelihood, when it involves a superior, when it risks backlash. That takes more courage than most people possess. He gestured to the envelope. Think about it. The nomination deadline is next month. After Wellington left, I remained in the small office, turning the envelope over in my hands. An ethics award. Recognition on a national stage. It felt surreal, almost excessive for what had begun as a simple moment of truth in a coffee shop. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Dorothy stood in the doorway, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. Looked like a serious conversation, she said, nodding toward where Wellington had departed. Everything all right. With the campaign? The campaign's perfect, I assured her, tucking the envelope into my folder. Mr. Wellington was just expressing his appreciation. Dorothy studied me with the perceptive gaze that had become familiar to everyone at Horizon. That's not all he was doing, was it? I smiled, unable to hide anything from her for long. He wants to nominate me for an ethics award, for exposing James's fraud. Well, that's wonderful, she beamed, then faltered slightly as she noted my ambivalence. Isn't it? I sighed, trying to articulate the discomfort I felt. It just seems, I don't know, self-congratulatory? To receive an award for something that anyone should have done in that situation. Dorothy settled into a chair across from me, her expression thoughtful. But not everyone would have done it, dear. That's the point. She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her shifting into wisdom-sharing mode. Recognition isn't always about rewarding exceptional behavior. Sometimes it's about normalizing it, showing others that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is valued. Her perspective, as always, offered clarity I hadn't considered. I hadn't thought of it that way. Besides, she added with a mischievous smile, think of all the good you could do with that platform, the changes you could inspire in other companies. The award ceremony was held in Chicago on a sweltering July evening. I sat at a round table near the front of the ballroom, surrounded by Vanessa, Dorothy, Mia, and several other colleagues who had made the trip to support me. The Wellington team occupied the table beside ours, Michael Wellington offering an encouraging nod as the MC approached the podium. The Integrity in Leadership Award recognizes an individual who has demonstrated exceptional moral courage in a business setting, the MC explained to the assembled crowd of nearly 500 corporate leaders, ethics officers, and industry professionals. Someone who has taken a stand for what's right, often at personal risk, and whose actions have created lasting positive change. As they read through the nominees, 5 in total, each with impressive stories of ethical leadership, I felt a strange sense of disconnection, as if they were describing someone else entirely. Had I really done something so extraordinary? It still felt like I had simply followed the only path my conscience would allow. This year's recipient, the MC continued, uncovered significant financial fraud within their organization, implemented new systems to prevent future ethical breaches, and transformed their company's culture through personal example and innovative programs. A spotlight suddenly illuminated our table. Please join me in congratulating Alex Morgan, Director of Client Ethics and Compliance at Horizon Marketing. The room erupted in applause as I made my way to the stage, my heart pounding. The Crystal Award felt heavy in my hands as I stood at the microphone, looking out over a sea of expectant faces. Thank you for this honor, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. But I have to be honest, I don't see myself as having done anything extraordinary. I paused, gathering my thoughts. What happened at Horizon began with a simple act of truth-telling. Not by me, but by someone who had nothing to gain and potentially much to lose. My eyes found Dorothy in the audience, her face glowing with pride. A coffee shop barista who saw wrongdoing and spoke up, who reminded me that integrity isn't about grand gestures or heroic stands. It's about the small choices we make every day when no one is looking. As I continued my speech, sharing the lessons we'd learned at Horizon and the systems we'd built to support ethical decision-making, I felt a weight lifting, the last remnants of doubt about the path I'd chosen. This wasn't about me receiving recognition. It was about elevating a conversation that affected workplaces everywhere, about acknowledging that ethical leadership requires both courage and vulnerability, both systems and human connection. Later that evening, as we celebrated over dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, Dorothy raised her glass in a toast. To small beginnings, she said, her eyes bright with emotion, and to the courage to follow where they lead. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the award or the recognition, but for the unexpected journey that had brought us all to this moment, for the whispered warning in a coffee shop that had changed everything, for the truth that, once spoken, could not be unheard, and most of all for the realization that sometimes our greatest purpose emerges not from our carefully laid plans, but from those moments when we simply choose to do what's right, regardless of the cost. 1 year to the day after Dorothy's whispered warning in Westside Coffee, I found myself standing outside a modern glass building in downtown Seattle, gathering my courage. The silver lettering on the door read, Pinnacle Marketing Group, and according to my research, James Parker had been working there as a senior account director for the past 6 months. I hadn't planned this confrontation. My trip to Seattle was for a legitimate purpose, presenting at a conference on ethical business practices, sharing the Horizon model that had now garnered national attention. But when I discovered that James was working just 3 blocks from my hotel, something pulled me toward this moment, this reckoning I hadn't known I needed. Are you sure about this? Mia's voice came through my phone, concern evident even across the distance. I'd called her that morning, seeking either encouragement or someone to talk me out of what I was contemplating. No, I admitted, watching people stream in and out of the building. But I feel like there's something unfinished. We never spoke after everything happened. He was just gone. And that bothers you? Mia sounded surprised. After what he did? I considered her question, trying to articulate the restlessness I'd been feeling. It's not about forgiveness or closure exactly. It's about, I don't know, standing in my truth directly, face to face. Just be careful, she cautioned. Men like James don't change easily. Don't expect an apology. I won't, I promised. I'll call you after. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the revolving door into the lobby. The receptionist, a young man with fashionable glasses and an attentive smile, looked up as I approached. Welcome to Pinnacle. How can I help you? I'm here to see James Parker if he's available. My name is Alex Morgan. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not of me personally, but of my name. Ms. Morgan, the ethics speaker from the conference? I nodded, somewhat surprised. That's right. Mr. Parker mentioned you might stop by. He reached for the phone. Let me see if he's available. So James had known I was in town, had perhaps even anticipated this visit. The realization unsettled me, shifting the dynamic I had imagined. Minutes later, I was being escorted to a conference room on the 10th floor. James was already inside, standing by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. He turned as I entered, and for a moment, we simply regarded each other across the polished table. He looked essentially the same. The tailored suit, the confident posture, the carefully styled hair. But there was something different in his eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Alex," he said finally, "I wondered if you'd find me." "I wasn't looking," I replied honestly. "But when I realized how close you were..." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee?" The irony of his offer wasn't lost on me. "No, thank you." We settled across from each other, the silence stretching between us like a living thing. I had imagined this moment many times over the past year, sometimes with anger, sometimes with vindication, sometimes with simple curiosity. But now that it was here, I found myself oddly calm. "Congratulations on the ethics award," James said, breaking the silence. "I saw the announcement in the industry newsletter." "Thank you." I studied him, searching for sarcasm or bitterness, but his expression remained neutral. "You've landed on your feet, I see." A small smile, nothing like the dazzling charm he once projected. "Eventually, after 3 months of unemployment and a few doors slammed in my face." He leaned back in his chair. Vanessa was thorough in her background checks, as she should have been. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. "So, Alex, why are you here? What do you want from this conversation?" The directness of his question cut through any pretense. Why was I here? What did I hope to gain? "I think I wanted to see if you understood," I said finally. "Not just that what you did was wrong, but why it mattered, the harm it caused beyond the money." James was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "You mean to Rebecca? To the Wellington account? To the company's reputation? To all of it? To the trust people placed in you? To the culture you damaged with your actions?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times in client meetings when he was formulating a response. "I've had a lot of time to think about it. Too much time, probably." His eyes met mine. What I did was calculated, selfish, and completely indefensible. I exploited systems that relied on trust. I manipulated people who trusted me. The admission surprised me, not because I had expected denial, but because of the clarity with which he expressed it. "Including Rebecca," I said, the young account executive's face flashing in my memory. "Especially Rebecca." Regret flickered across his features. "She was collateral damage in my project. I'm not proud of that." "Have you spoken to her since?" He shook his head. "I tried, about 6 months ago. She declined the call. I can't blame her." We fell silent again, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the conference room. Outside, Seattle continued its bustling pace, oblivious to the quiet reckoning happening 10 floors above. "I've wondered..." "Something," James said finally. "How did you know? What first made you suspicious?" I considered whether to tell him, weighing the risk of exposing Dorothy even now, but there was no danger to her anymore, and perhaps there was value in honesty. "Dorothy at Westside Coffee. She saw what you were doing with the company card and warned me." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The older barista? With the silver hair?" I nodded. "I always overtipped her," he said with a rueful laugh. "Thought she liked me." "She saw through you," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." James absorbed this, a complex emotion crossing his face. Embarrassment, perhaps, or the humbling realization that his charm had limits after all. "What happened after I left?" he asked. "To the company? To you?" I told him. About the ethics committee, about Dorothy's role as ethics advocate, about the systems we'd implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't seeking to hurt him with these details, nor to boast about the positive changes that had emerged from his downfall. I was simply sharing the truth of what had happened, the ripples his actions had created, both destructive and, eventually, constructive. "You've built something meaningful," he said when I finished. "Something better than what was there before." "We have," I agreed, "but I would have preferred to build it without the trauma you caused." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for the actual harm. For betraying your trust, specifically." I hadn't expected an apology, had told myself I didn't need one. Yet hearing the words stirred something unexpected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. A loosening of a knot I hadn't realized I still carried. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. As our conversation drew to a close, James walked me to the elevator. We stood side by side, watching the floor numbers descend, the awkwardness of former colleagues who now occupied entirely different worlds. "Can I ask you something?" he said as the elevator arrived. "Does it ever bother you that your career advancement came through my downfall? That if I hadn't been caught, you might still be in the same position?" The question might once have stung, might have fed into insecurities I'd harbored, but now I could see it for what it was. A final attempt to reframe the narrative, to suggest that my success was somehow linked to his failure, rather than my own merit. My advancement came through my work, my integrity, and my vision for what Horizon could be, I said, stepping into the elevator. Your downfall was entirely of your own making. Those two facts exist independently of each other. As the doors began to close, I added, I hope you find your way to something authentic, James. Something you don't have to lie to achieve. His expression, surprise giving way to thoughtful consideration, was the last thing I saw before the elevator descended. Outside, Seattle's characteristic drizzle had begun, a gentle mist that softened the city's sharp edges. I walked slowly back toward my hotel, processing the encounter. It hadn't gone as I'd imagined, neither confrontational nor particularly cathartic. Instead, it had been something simpler, an honest exchange between two people who had briefly shared a significant chapter in their lives, now moving in different directions. My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "How did your presentation go?" I smiled, thinking of how much had changed. In a year, Dorothy was now not just a mentor, but a dear friend. The ethics program at Horizon had become a model other companies were seeking to emulate, and I had found my voice, my purpose, in ways I could never have anticipated when I first walked into Westside Coffee that October morning. "Presentation went well," I replied. "Just had an unexpected meeting afterward. I'll tell you about it when I get back." Her response came quickly. "Looking forward to it. Remember, even the difficult conversations are opportunities for growth, yours or theirs." As I reached my hotel, I paused in the lobby, struck by a sudden realization. The anxiety I'd felt before seeing James, the restlessness that had driven me to seek him out, it was gone. Not because of anything he had said or done, but because I no longer needed his acknowledgement or understanding to validate my journey. The truth, once recognized, had created its own path forward. For Horizon, for Dorothy, for me. That evening, as I prepared for my return flight to Denver, I stood at my hotel window watching Seattle transform in the twilight. Lights flickered on across the city, each one representing a story, a life, a set of choices being made in countless offices and homes. In one of those buildings, James Parker was continuing on his path, hopefully changed by his experiences, possibly not. In Denver, Horizon was evolving into a company where ethics wasn't just a policy, but a lived value. And somewhere in between, there were coffee shops where small moments of truth were unfolding. Whispered warnings, honest conversations, quiet, acts of integrity that would ripple outward in ways no one could predict. My phone rang. Vanessa, calling with updates about a new client pitch. As I answered, turning away from the window to focus on the future waiting for me back home, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect or resolved, but because I had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all. The truth doesn't always arrive with thunderclaps and dramatic revelations. Sometimes it comes in whispers, in small moments of choice, in the courage to see clearly and speak honestly, even when no one is watching. And sometimes that quiet truth changes everything.